So if you've got this publishing realm that you're creating, you are the main author, the main publisher, all this stuff going, then you decide, I think we need to start a conference in Toronto called the Indie Author Conference. What was the genesis of that?
Spite. I go down, and I'm lucky enough to be able to afford to go down to things like NINC and 20 books to 50K and, all of those types of conferences where there's so much good information and there's nothing in Canada that I know of that is easy for people. Definitely not in Toronto. And so I decided I wanted to bring that in here, and I wanted something like that in Canada for Canadians who didn't have my advantages. The other side of it, and the spite part of it, was it annoys me hugely that the Canadian Authors Council, the grants, the vast majority of the aid that the government offers is to trade publishers in Canada. There are some grants that as authors, individual authors, we can get, but there's almost nothing that we can get as publishers. We are locked out of almost all of them. And it annoys me to a great degree because there are so many authors who are doing so well as indie authors. And I think there's a lot more who could do a lot better if we had some help from the government. And it's not happening. So if they're not going to help, I'm going to try to do it myself.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 353 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Tao Wong. Tao is a full-time author in the science fiction and fantasy genres, writing primarily in the LitRPG genre. We talk about his writing, about LitRPG, about running an online business in Canada, entrepreneurship, and the awesome new Toronto Indie Author Conference is coming to Canada in early May 2024. That's all coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. Okay, I lied. You're going to hear more about the Toronto Indie Author Conference because this episode is sponsored by the Toronto Indie Author Conference, where I, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, will be one of the speakers. Are you an independent author navigating the complexities of the publishing business? Do you dream of transforming your passion for writing into a thriving author business? Don't miss this opportunity to immerse yourself in the world of Canadian indie publishing's first author business conference. And there are two ways you can save money. First, there's a Kobo-sponsored accessibility fund available that you can apply for to get your registration of the conference for free. Check it out at their website, torontoindieauthorcon.com. Second, Stark Reflections listeners can get $10 off their registration by using the code STARK10, STARK10 at checkout. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to fuel your literary ambitions. Tickets are limited, so act fast and secure your place at the Toronto Indie Author Conference today. And again, the conference being held May 4th and 5th in 2024 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, can be found at torontoindieauthorcon.com. Okay, so for the pre-matter that I usually do in the show, if you can't tell by the sound of my voice, there is something still in my throat, in my chest, in my sinuses. I'm having so much trouble with having a clear voice, and it is very late in the day as I am recording this, so I am going to forego the comments from recent episodes and personal update And let's move right in to this interview with Tao. Tao, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for having me.
It's so great to get a chance to chat with you. It's been a while. So before we get into the heart of the topic, let's talk a little bit about your background as a writer. I mean, why did you end up in this realm?
Your luck, in many
Really?
ways. Yeah, I mean, I have always been writing and telling stories, obviously. Almost all writers do that to some extent.
Right.
But for me, it was luck. I was reading about LitRPG aspects, even though I didn't know the term at that time.
Right.
And I somehow or another, and it's been a while, ended up on Royal Road, which is this free fiction website where a lot of new Western authors were writing Western RPG aspects and stories. And I
Okay.
read through a bunch of them, Viridian Gate Online, the game, a bunch of Scotty Futcher's work. And I went, I could write something like this. And so my first work was based off the light novels that I was reading just before that, which is The Adventures of Brad. And I just started writing that for fun. I was in the middle of winter. I was in the Yukon at that point, which means there's not a lot to do at night when it's
Yeah.
minus 50 and it's dark all the time. So, it was a good way of filling the time, a chance to just flex some creative juices. And I think about 3, 4 months later, I turned around and realized I had a couple of books done. I actually started a second series in between, again, this is purely for fun. And I decided that I should do something with this. For the past few years, I'd been reading Kristen Carton-Rusch's blog about publishing on and off, because I'm a bit of a business geek, and I found everything that she wrote fascinating. And, there was some portion of my mind that went, oh, I'll probably become a writer and write, when I'm old and, retired and I have time to pursue all of this.
Right.
And so I knew about indie publishing at that time, and I wasn't in a space or desire to pursue traditional publishing. It just was too much work. So I decided to throw the books up on Amazon. And I was very lucky that LitRPG was really hot at that time, and anything that anyone wrote was getting reads and sales. And then I just kept going with it.
So what year was this roughly?
2017.
2017. It feels almost like that was probably an optimal time as that was becoming a massive thing on Amazon and places like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The first wave was in late 2016. I hit the market about May 2017 or so.
Okay.
So very, very much. I'm basically what I consider the second wave of the Western RPG authors. Obviously, the Russians came before us, and then Japanese RPG has been going on forever. Same with Korean and stuff. But I got really lucky. A lot of the first wave, like Luke, Chatfield, Aileron, hit very big as well. And they were the ones who began and the big push. And then I just kind of came in right after,
Right.
purely by accident.
But I love the fact that so this was something you read and enjoyed and wanted to play around in and write and just have fun, and maybe, when you retire in 40 years, maybe that's something you'd consider. And I love the fact that you pursued it for passion and then discovered, oh my God, people want to read my stuff. And obviously that was just, it felt like it was a skyrocketing success, right? Like you started to write the novels and people couldn't get enough.
Yeah, it was kind of insane. I saw my first paycheck or sales amount because we get paid so much later. And I showed it to my wife, and I was like, this is mad.
Yeah.
And so I just kept writing because I
Wow.
was making really good money on it. And I still had my full-time job,
Mhm.
running my other business. And so I didn't have time to do any marketing or anything. And really it didn't make sense. I mean, everything that once I started looking into it, everything that I was reading said, wait until you have at least 3 books in a series kind of thing before you really throw the advertising dollars in. And I think that's a good rule of thumb at the very least.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that. So you mentioned this before. You mentioned being a business geek. You mentioned following Christine Catherine Rush. But you also, the other thing, I remember talking to you about this over lunch at an airport once, was you run a business or were running a business that was very much in line with the kind of stuff you write. I'm
Yep.
curious about your approach to the writing being very pragmatic and very business oriented because you already understood what it was like to run an independently owned business, right? Can you talk a little bit about that sort of that business acumen and how you
Yeah.
applied that to your writing?
Sure. I mean, I've been very lucky in the sense that my background's in marketing, right? Online marketing. That's what I used to do when I worked for other people. My
Right.
business was an e-commerce business, selling games, board games specifically, mostly. And so I brought a lot of that knowledge in. A lot of the mistakes I see people do, I've already made them, a decade ago with my other business, with
Right. Right.
structure, with understanding how to hire people. And I still make mistakes with all of those things. It's
Right.
always a process. But the major ones I didn't have to worry about. With writing and publishing, I talk about having two hats. I have the writer hat where I write whatever the heck I want to write. And then I have the publisher hat where I try to figure out how to sell the things that I've written. I was recently at a conference, the Auto Sustainability Conference, and listening to Becca talk about the different types of authors. And I realized I'm very much a scenic route person in her terminology, in the
Okay.
sense that I can take my time. I'm lucky enough that I can take my time to reach the destination. And so I can write what I want without having to worry too much about the market because I already have my success. I don't have to, try to keep piling it on.
Right.
Um, and so I have that advantage, being able to just choose how I'm marketing it. Once I've written the book, that's where the publishing hat really comes on, trying to figure out how to position it, all the 4 Ps in marketing, how much effort and time and, energy and who to touch with all of these things. That's when it comes in. It doesn't come in until I finish the work, though, for the
Right.
most part. There is a little bit, I should say, of it that comes in when I am choosing what project to work on next to some extent, because I do. Most writers have the same problem where they have 1,000,001 ideas and they will never get to all of them. So sometimes I will purposely pick an idea that is a little bit more commercial than, something that I know is not going to work.
Right. Right. Well, of course, you can't help but apply that acumen to the writing. Going, well, this one's going to pay off a little quicker than the other ones. So you also, just as an author, you have a team, right? You've built a team around this because as a business
Yeah.
owner, you recognize, yeah, I could run the store myself, but I probably need staff. So I'm
Yeah.
curious as to how that evolved because, and does that allow you actually more time to write?
Um, a little. It's
Okay.
I call myself very lazy.
Okay.
I because I am. It was funny actually. I could have had staff a lot earlier than I started having them. I think it was late 2019,
Okay.
pretty much November when I really started looking at it, going, you know what, I probably do need staff. Um, and that's when I hired Kate, my first PA, who's a contractor with me. And she works on the back end side of things that are easy to hand out. I don't have to be in there dealing with it. It's not like editing or cover design or, advertising and money in that sense. But part of the reason why it took me so long was because I was burned out from my previous business hiring staff.
Right.
One of the things that drove me insane was the constant churn of people. I'd hire someone, I'd train them up. 2 to 4 years later, generally 2 to 3 years, really, they'd leave for another job,
Right.
which is fine. I mean, we were a great place for training people up in that sense, but we couldn't, because of the business that we were in, we didn't have the margins to pay people what they were worth. And that burnt me out as a employer. So I didn't hire people for a very long time. I actively resisted, and I still do, growing the business to a certain extent, because I don't want to be sitting there with a giant payroll that I have to hit.
Yeah.
My other business, we had a very big payroll and a very big rent bill that I had to hit every single month.
Right.
Got up there. So I don't have to do that anymore to the same extent, which is very relaxing. To
Yeah.
give you an idea, my rent on my last year was about $10,000 a month.
Okay, so obviously having to bring in a significant income, pay for rent, pay for utilities, pay for staff, and then pay for supplies, pay for
Yeah,
the product
everything.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Wow.
it was. I joke that indie authors or being an indie publisher is easy mode of entrepreneurs, because the minimum cost and the setup is so much less than
Yeah.
what I did before.
Right. Yeah.
The first time I had to deal with a cover cost, I looked at the cover cost and it was like $250. And I laughed, because literally a couple of months ago, I had a single bill from Canada Post that was $100,000.
So you're kind of like, wow, that's a bargain for this guy. Yeah. I mean, and when you think
I,
about it, right? When you think about like the editorial cover design, maybe even marketing copy that you're paying someone to help construct, you probably can get away with 5 grand as sort
yeah.
of a cost or less if you have,
Oh, yeah.
trusted people that give you a family rate. Like that's phenomenal when you think about, well, first month 10,000, that's just the rent. Right. And I had to pay first and last month's rent, and I had to do this. All right. So this is phenomenal. So as if you don't have enough on your plate, right? So you no longer own that business. Is your author business that
No,
business? Okay.
yeah, I got rid of that one a while ago. Luckily, just before the pandemic,
Oh, okay. Wow. Good
in
timing.
2019.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a very lucky timing. I would not want to run a retail, because we had a retail store back then,
Yeah.
during the pandemic period. That would have been, and paying that bill. And yeah, we could go into why, but it's
Yeah.
not relevant to this.
But I was thinking, so you're in a situation where it's all your writing. You don't actually have people writing in your universes or anything like that,
I
right? Or do
I
you?
do actually.
You do now.
I have
Oh, you do.
co-authors. Yeah, I
Oh, so you have
have.
authors you have to pay too. Oh boy.
Well, I mean, it's a royalty share, right? Because I pay them my royalties from the sales and whatnot. But I
Yeah,
do
of
have
course. Yeah.
co-authors. But I don't pay them a salary or anything. It's just, we do
Okay.
have. Oh God, I've worked with. I think we've got about 5 active co-authors right now, and
Oh,
a
are these
couple of them on
co-authored pieces?
lines.
So it's not like you're
Yep, they're all
acquiring, you're
co-authors.
actually working with people that you know you can write with then. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We did one person that we published during the pandemic for, just helping people out during that
Yeah.
period. And that was also the time when I realized I don't really want to be a publisher. I don't have the
Right.
time or desire to spend the time working on someone's work that isn't mine to some extent. So
Yeah, I
it's
get it.
different
Yeah.
ball
It's different when
entirely.
you're collaborating than you're publishing someone else's work entirely. I get that. Okay. So
Yeah.
so things you've got this publishing realm that you're creating, you are the main author, the main publisher, all
Yeah.
this stuff going. Then you decide, I think we need to start a conference in Toronto called the Indie Author Conference. What was the genesis of that?
Spite.
Spite. Oh, ooh, let's dig in here. All
Um,
right. Okay.
um, there's two reasons. One, very much there is nothing in Toronto, very much in terms of, author conferences. At the time when I was thinking into it, there was nothing at all. Now I think there's a very small one that a magazine has started. Augur, I think they had a small conference last year, and I
Okay.
think they might be having one again this year. But it's very much focused on more towards trad focused.
Right.
Um, there's nothing very much that's very focused on indie authors, independent publishing. I go down, and I'm lucky enough to be able to afford to go down to things like Nink and 20 books to 50K and, all of those types of conferences where there's so much good information and there's nothing in Canada that I know of that is easy for people. Definitely not in Toronto. And so I decided I wanted to bring that in here, and I wanted something like that in Canada for Canadians who didn't have my advantages.
Yeah.
Um, the other side of it, and the spite part of it, was it annoys me hugely that the Canadian Authors Council, the grants, the vast majority of the aid that the government offers is to generic publishers, right? Publishers in Canada. There are some grants that, as authors, individual authors, we can get, but there's almost nothing that we can get as publishers. We are locked out of almost all of them. And it annoys me to a great degree because there are so many authors who are doing so well as indie authors. And I think there's a lot more who could do a lot better if we had some help from the government. And it's not happening.
Right.
So if they're not going to help, I'm going to try to do it myself.
I love that independent spirit. And thank you for this because prior to your announcement of the Toronto Indie Author Conference, there was nothing. Yeah, I mean, I would go to CanCon in Ottawa and I would be on a panel or do a presentation about how you can self-publish, but I was the weirdo. I was the oddity. I remember in the early days of Nink, I was the odd person there
Okay.
talking about indie publishing, and now it's quite a bit different. So, what you're doing is you're staking something in the ground to say, and I want to say this on behalf of authors who don't even realize what they now have here in Canada, in Toronto, if especially if you're in the eastern part of Canada, it's kind of central. It's like this, it's the central hub for center of the universe. A lot of people often think about when you're Canadian. So, and you're bringing in some heavy hitters, like you mentioned Becca Syme. So when I saw, oh my God, you've got Becca Syme coming to Toronto, this is
Right.
phenomenal. Like this is a great experience for people.
Yeah, I was so surprised when I made this announcement. When we were trying to find speakers, there were two things that we were looking for. One, we wanted as many Canadian speakers as possible. Um, well, actually, three things come to it. One, we wanted as many Canadian speakers as possible because, this is a Canadian conference. We
Right.
want to highlight Canadians who are doing well, and we have a lot of Canadians doing well. The
Yeah.
second thing we wanted was people who knew what they were doing and could show their success. And so, sometimes that second one will override the first side, right?
Yeah.
Becca's the person to talk to about burnout and, coaching and
Oh,
stuff
for
like that.
sure.
She
Yeah.
has her own author side that has done really well, but she's also, the person who's been leading the charge on burnout
Yeah.
since the start. And so getting people who can talk about both of those things is really important to us. I mean, the third aspect, as I said, is we want the people who can showcase that we can point to and go, hey, look, this is not a dream. This is people who have done this and who have
Right.
done a good job at it. To some extent, we tried to make sure that it wasn't just, six-figure authors showing up, because it's one thing to having a few of them is great, but sometimes, some people in the middle level are good too.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just like, oh, well, I mean, they're the rare exceptions, they're the unicorns. We don't have to worry about them. But no,
Right.
there are people who are doing well in the middle grade, who are making their living
Yeah.
uh, perfectly well.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the challenges is because you look at somebody who's a 6 or 7 figure author, and even though you may be doing well, you look at them and go, wow, I'm never going to get there. That's just too far away, considering there's just this massive middle ground. So, what are some of the other authors or success people that you're going to actually have there? Just again, I want people to be aware of this. If they're anywhere near Toronto, definitely a beautiful city to come visit. But and I say that being, an hour and a half outside the city, so I can easily get there myself. But what are some of the other things that people are going to be able to see at this conference, or people are going to see speakers, panels, stuff like that?
Well, I mean, with the panels, we are going on quite broad range. Obviously, I'll be speaking on it. We are also have breaking it up into two sections. We are having speakers and panels. We've got two rooms set up. We're going to have a beginner section and an advanced section.
Right,
And that's more for where you are in your author career. So,
right,
we'll have some very hands-on, this is how you do Facebook ads at a very basic level. We'll have something else a little bit further. On top of that, on the second day, we actually have what I'm stealing this from Nink is the roundtables, where we're going to
yes,
have people sitting down with with the experts talking about individual aspects. This is I find really useful for people who need to get really into the weeds with works, because seminars or speeches are useful for getting the overall broad things, but sometimes you really need to get into the weeds for specifics.
right,
And that's what the roundtables I find particularly useful for. I find roundtables are great for more advanced authors in particular, because they often have this small little thing that they need to fix. And it's a one question, very quick answer, but it can give a lot of people a lot of benefit on top of it. But it's not something that you could cover in a speech or a speaker or a panel necessarily. So those are the two things. I mean, the speakers that we have, we've got yourself coming along to speak about all the various wide conference and wide options. We're going to talk about we're trying to find a tax accountant to speak with us about specifically Canadian tax laws and all the grants and everything. If not, we're going to throw it into an open panel, because between
yeah,
myself, you, Chatfield, we can probably talk about things like public lending rights, access copyright, things that most people don't realize that as Canadian authors we can get.
yes.
And it's not things that we can talk to with US authors, because they don't get that. And,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
laugh at them at sometimes.
Well, I
Yes,
mean,
we
the
get US
National Art,
things.
National Library, and right, the requirement for ISBNs and having to ship your books there, and never mind, we don't have a mail rate, right? We don't have a media mail rate here in Canada, so
Yep.
shipping books is a completely different business. It costs more to ship a book than the retail cost of a book in many cases, right?
Yep. Exactly. We've got Sylvia Frost coming, which is I'm actually really excited about.
Yeah,
She's an amazing cover designer and author as well. But she's made covers for some really big romance people, and she has a very good eye for what's trending in the area. So she's going to have two talks, one which is on basics of cover design, how to analyze a cover, how to
yeah,
pull it apart, what you're trying to talk to with a cover designer, basically how to make your cover, which is your biggest selling thing, good. And then she's going to have a more generic talk later about, cover trends and things like that that's happening inside that she's seeing, and teaching people how to look for things in that. So I'm really excited about her talk. We've got Melissa coming in, talk about Facebook ads, which is, I love Facebook and I hate it because you can spend so much money and waste it all. So it's always good to get someone who's very into it to talk about it and help you figure out how to make use of it, even at the lowest levels. And Stephen Kotowicz is also talking about Kickstarter. He ran
yes,
the Canada's best science fiction Kickstarter anthology. He did really well for a short story anthology. He did incredibly well.
amazing.
So you're going to have him talk about that. And then he'll be on a general panel talking about, why distribution methods and, ways of getting money outside of that.
Right.
And then, we've got Son Ennis. We're going to be talking about audiobooks as well on top of that. And so we can discuss, all the things that you need to know about getting an audiobooks, which is a big area these days,
Yes.
and go from there. Then we'll have probably end up with and then you can always ask us questions during the roundtables and things like that.
Yeah. Oh my God. This sounds like just a powerhouse of time. And I'm so thrilled, like I said, to go to a conference in Canada that's not 99% traditional published focus, right?
Yep.
That's actually indie, and we can actually talk about indie things. And you're a pioneer of bringing this to Canada. And I can imagine that the cost, the expense, all of the things that you've had to invest in this on a bet that this is going to be something that can be a big thing, right? Because obviously you start off in the negative with something like this, and then hopefully this is something that can build and people can appreciate it. I imagine that might have been a sort of a maybe something that maybe you hesitated at the beginning, thinking, this is a big investment. What am I? Do I
It
want
is.
this?
It's a relatively big investment. It is definitely, you know, think the financial side is one side, for sure. But the thing that really makes me hesitate a little, or made me hesitate the most, was the time investment. Uh, the amount of energy that has to be put into trying to get this up. And I have to say, I am really lucky that I have staff that I can ask to go and help out with this. We have some volunteers, but we've also been very lucky in people like Draft to Digital being willing to invest in this. Kobo has been really supportive. Kobo's actually going to come. They'll be doing a talk as well, and they'll have a lot of people at the roundtables to talk about how to do it. But they've also invested into it, sponsored, and they've been able to give us money for an accessibility fund. So if you don't have money, just go to the website. We have an email section where you can enter your name in to become part of to get a free ticket for the accessibility fund. Hopefully, depending on how many people we have in there, we might not be able to give it to everyone. But we've got 10 to 15 at least free seats to give away.
That's fantastic.
And it's free as in they've been paid for and sponsored by other people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, someone else is paying for that. That is fantastic. I love
Exactly.
that. Yeah, that is so okay. So where can people find out more about the Toronto Indie Author Conference?
TorontoIndieAuthor.com. Yep.
TorontoIndieAuthor.com. Okay, nice and
Yep.
easy. Awesome.
Yep.
And there's still seats available. People can still register.
Sorry, TorontoIndieAuthorCon.com. Sorry.
Oh, gotcha.
And yes, there's a lot of seats still available. We actually, because we're running it through the YMCA, we can actually flex to quite a few people inside both rooms, depending on how we do the seating. One of the major sections, they actually have bench seating if we really wanted to pull out a lot of people.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we still have a lot of seats left for people to join.
Awesome.
Yeah,
And
at this
chances
time.
are by the time this interview airs, there may be fewer seats left. So don't
Yeah,
check this out. If you're a Canadian author, this is something you really need to check out. Okay, and where can people find out more about you and your books and the stuff that you write?
there's two places. My personal website is mylifemytao.com. The business one, which includes all my co-author works, as well, is under starletpublishing.com.
Okay.
And so you can find that. We also have, if you're listening to this, a discount code if you're using it, listening to here, called STARK, STARK 10, the number 10. So 10. So STARK 10. If you use that, you can get a $10 off for the tickets. It's normally $120 plus taxes. That's after Eventbrite takes all of its charges and everything. So this will reduce it a little.
Well, on behalf of my listeners, I want to thank you for offering them a very special code, and I want my listeners to take advantage of this because I'd love to see you at Toronto Indie Author Conference. Tao, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Thank you so much, Mark.
The first thing that I wanted to reflect on was when Tao talked about the fact that as an entrepreneur, it's so expensive in almost any other industry except author. If you want to start a business, a retail business or any other small business, the overhead to get started is so ridiculously huge. We are so lucky as authors. When we look at the cost of a cover design for a few $100s, editing maybe $1,000, $2,000, something like that, and sometimes cheaper, that you can actually get started without laying down that kind of capital. We are so privileged as authors to have access to these free tools for publishing. It's not easy. No, it's not easy being an author, and most authors who are publishing are not making a significant amount of money. But the reality is, we can hit the ground running a lot better than in other industries. And we often think, as indie authors, we're down on ourselves and upset that things don't work for us. But that is just such a reminder of how we can kind of start with a bit of an advantage that other businesses don't have. Speaking of advantages, Tao's done really well for himself. He has made good money running the businesses he's run. He's making good money with his fiction and the publishing that he's doing, the independent publishing he's doing. And I love that he saw a gap in the Canadian market. And again, this has been a theme in the last several episodes, if you're paying attention. I know I am. Every once in a while, I sometimes pay attention to the things I say. But that theme is really important to me, is that people who I just admire and respect so much, people who find a gap in something, they see a need for it, and they step up and do it. And that, again, that's independent spirit. That's entrepreneurship. That is pioneering spirit, and I absolutely love, adore, respect that. So kudos to Tao and his team and all the people who are involved in putting this conference together. The Stark Reflections podcast is a sponsor for that conference, and very minor sponsorship. It didn't cost very much, but I wanted to, when I saw this was happening, I wanted to be part of supporting this right away. I am, of course, going to be a speaker there. If you are going to be there, don't forget to take advantage of Stark 10 or, the awesome Kobo sponsorship. Apply. Go to the website and apply for that. Love to see you there. I love to see this coming to Canada because, like Tao, I've gone to so many different conferences in Canada, and, the majority of them are traditionally published focused. And I think that does a disservice. I love conferences that have a bit of both, so authors can have the full experience of what is truly possible. I think they're great things with the traditional publishing, but I think there's also great things in indie publishing. And I hate the fact that people on either side of that fence don't often see the benefit of the other. One of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was so I could continue to show the pros and cons of both sides in a very stark, honest, open way. So if you're going to be there at the Toronto Indie Author Conference, I look forward to seeing you there. Otherwise, I'm going to see you next week. That's right, on the same Bat channel. I will be here next week for episode 354. So until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.